We begin this morning with the exhaustive review the New York Times published yesterday detailing the president's effort to interfere in the Russia investigation. In one instance last year, the paper reports that the president called his newly installed acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker and asked if the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Manhattan, Geoffrey Berman, described by the Times as a Trump ally, could take charge of the criminal investigation that resulted in the president being implicated in campaign finance violations. The paper cites U.S. officials with direct knowledge of the call. The paper says Whitaker, who privately told associates that part of his role at the Justice Department was to, quote, jump on a grenade for the president, oh my Lord, knew he couldn't put Berman in charge because Berman, a former law partner of the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, was recused from the investigation. According to the Times, quote, the president soon soured on Mr. Whitaker, as he often does with his aides, and complained about his inability to pull levers at the Justice Department that could make the president's many legal problems go away. The Times reports that Whitaker did, however, tell some DOJ associates that prosecutors in New York required, quote, adult supervision. According to the Review, Democrats are now looking into whether Whitaker perjured himself when he told the House Judiciary Committee earlier this month that the president never pressured him over the investigations.
At no time has the White House asked for, nor have I provided, any promises or commitments concerning the special counsel's investigation or any other investigation.
Did you ever have any conversations with the president about firing or reassigning any personnel, U.S. attorneys or others who work with the Southern District of New York? With the president or anybody at all? I want to know whether you talked to President Trump at all about the Southern District of New York's case involving Michael Cohen.
I am not going to discuss my private conversations with the President of the United States.
Mr. Whitaker, did the president lash out to you on or about December 8th, 2018, to discuss a case before the Southern District in New York where he was identified as individual one?
No, Congressman.
Did anyone on the president's behalf, either inside the White House or outside the White House, contact you to lash out or express dissatisfaction?
Did they contact me to lash out?
Yes. Did they reach out to you in some way to express dissatisfaction?
No.
Did you ask Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker to change the leadership of the investigation into your former personal attorney, Michael Cohen?
No, not at all. I don't know who gave you that. Just more fake news. There's a lot of fake news out there. No, I didn't.
It's not even trying anymore.
For its reporting, the Times says it reviewed documents and conducted several dozen interviews with current and former government officials, members of Congress, legal experts, and more.
So, Ken, first of all, looks like Mr. Whitaker may have a problem with his testimony before Congress. He possibly perjured himself, but we can go back to what Judge Napolitano said on Fox News yesterday afternoon. The bigger story is that it looks like, based on these New York Times reports, the president actually may have engaged in a very active attempt to obstruct justice.
Yeah, you know, this New York Times story did a great public service, I think, because it put the focus back perhaps where it belongs in terms of this president and his alleged misconduct. And, you know, and essentially they summed up by saying, you know, a lot of this conduct has been reported, but the public has grown inured to it because it's a daily occurrence. And I got to read, as an old newspaper guy, I want to read this sentence to you. But fusing the strands reveals an extraordinary story of a president who has attacked the law enforcement apparatus of his own government like no other president in history, and who has turned the effort into an obsession. And I think that's the key here. What we've seen with Donald Trump is not necessarily what Richard Nixon did, which was to order the CIA to tell the FBI to stop investigating on the grounds of national security. He hasn't necessarily used the levers of his power. What he's done is use the bully pulpit. He's made private calls. He's made requests of people. He's sought to intimidate people, all of which in isolation may technically be legal, but together it's a pattern that I think you're going to see in Robert Mueller's report described as potentially obstruction of justice. We'll have to see exactly what Mueller says about it, but I think this is a powerful case, and the Times has offered some new information, other information we've known for a long time. It's a powerful case that the president has behaved in a way that no other president has behaved, and potentially has obstructed justice.
And as the Times lays out, this is a pattern. We've seen it whether it was James Comey or Jeff Sessions. The president upset that Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation. He saw people within the Justice Department as working for him and there to defend him. And I think it's important to identify for people at home who may not be familiar with Geoffrey Berman, Ken, who exactly he is and why President Trump would want him at the head of this investigation as some kind of a bulwark or a guardrail against what he thought was coming down the pike in the Cohen investigation.
Well, he was Donald Trump's appointee to be the U.S. attorney, and that's really all you need to know about it. But he had recused, and the way it works is the U.S. attorney asked the Justice Department permission to recuse. He doesn't make that decision on his own, and the Justice Department had granted that recusal. And so Matthew Whitaker knew that there was no way that that was going to happen, and it didn't happen. And look, my reporting suggests to me that Whitaker knew that he was under a microscope in this job, and he was walking a very fine line, and he knew that whatever he did, he was going to be accountable for to Congress. And I think we're seeing that play out. So it doesn't surprise me that this ultimately did not happen.
But, and also, I mean, Berman has pulled no punches at all in the Southern District of New York since he's been down there. So I think Donald Trump is misreading Geoffrey Berman and his character anyway, thinking, once again, projecting his own ethical lapses on somebody else, because from everything I've heard, Geoffrey Berman doesn't look like the type of guy or seem like the type of guy that would pull punches. But, you know, Caddy, yesterday as we were reading this story, Mika and I just commented that just one of these stories, if that story had dropped in the middle of the Obama administration with nothing before it or nothing after it, there would be immediate investigations and calls for impeachment. If it had dropped in the middle of the George W. Bush administration, if it had dropped in the middle of the Bill Clinton administration and nothing else had dropped before, or you could go back to every single administration, there would be immediate calls. If the president went to the acting Justice Department, head of the Justice Department, and said, hey, I want you to put pressure on the Southern District of New York and, get that guy back in there because they're investigating me and the heat is on. And, I mean, but we've gotten so used to it that it's just another day.
There were two big stories yesterday where I had exactly the response that you've just outlined. One was this one, and how that would have caused, it would have been headline news for weeks in the Obama administration, and there would have been calls from Republicans for him probably to step down immediately if it had been in the Obama administration. The other one, which we'll get to later, is the story that there were attempts from top Trump administration officials during the transition and even after the transition to give nuclear technology to the Saudis. That would have been, which is also being investigated by Congress. Incredible story. Also would have been the major news of the Obama. Imagine if it had come out that President Obama had been trying, some of his aides had been trying to get nuclear technology to the Saudis. No. It would have been up in arms.
And given everything else that's going on with the Saudis and everything that happened in the beginning of this presidency with his visit, it's incredible.
Hold on. But, Mike, also with profit.
Profit.
They wanted to profit off it. People like Flynn wanted to make a quick buck off of it.
But you raised what I view as the ultimate damage to institutions in this country. The fact that you have a series of stories in the spate of 48 to 72 hours. You've got the Saudi story. You've got the Rod Rosenstein 25th Amendment story. You've got Mr. McCabe, who's going to be here later this morning, speaking to the Gang of Eight, House and Senate leaders and intelligence committees about the president being under investigation for associations potentially with Russia. You've got all of that, and now you have this story about Whitaker being the lead of the story. And by the way, thank God for newspapers. You've got all of that, and the attitude out in the country, the reaction out in the country is, okay, pass the salt. That's what he has done. with this fire hydrant,
2 years.
this daily fire hydrant of chaos, corruption, grifting. That's what Donald Trump has done.
It's the same thing with lying, Mika. You know, in the middle of a presidential campaign, if somebody got caught lying, they would just blare it up. It would be a 30-second ad for the last month of the campaign. When you lie 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 times.
How about 5 times a day?
In a couple of years, or
least?
5 times a day, and then just dismiss it as fake news when you can actually see the evidence right there in front of you. He said this, and then he said this.
What's happening at the border?
What's happening at the border?
What he's doing with the border crisis.
Lying. You look at statistics from his own administration, from the Trump administration.
Yeah.
You match them with the claims he's making at political rallies, and any 5-year-old can look and say, "Oh, he's lying." Right?
Former Vice President.
All he does is go fake news, and there are a lot of people that just sort of follow along.
Joe Biden, we'll show him later, but it was talking about the impact of our place in the world, given events that have happened abroad recently and things that were said about this country and the way we were received. It's dangerous. It's damning. It's not where we want to be. But
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.